Hi, I'm Kevin Alcuni, adult librarian in the Exploration and Creativity Department of the Los Angeles Public Library.
Hi, and I'm Patty Alvarado, adult librarian for the Benjamin Franklin branch of the Los Angeles Public Library.
We'd like to take this time to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities, our Library Foundation, and our behind-the-scenes staff for helping bring the LA Made programs to you virtually. LA Made focuses on the diverse landscape of Los Angeles, highlighting the immense artistic and performance talent that has developed in the course of the city's eclectic history. If you'd like to see more of our amazing programs, please visit our online calendar at lapl.org/events. And for our LA Made programs, specifically visit lapl.org/LAMade. Our website also has blog posts that highlight the city's diverse resources and upcoming programs.
Now for what we have all been waiting for, I'm very excited to introduce today's LA Made program, California Native Garden Tour. This garden is drought tolerant, 100% watered, hand watered, and consists of mostly California native plants. It's lush, beautiful, and supports many native pollinators, which are very, very important. Recorded last month by the library's social media librarian Keith Kessler, landscape architectural designer Flor Mota gives us a virtual garden tour of my home garden in the Boyle Heights neighborhood in Los Angeles. Flor is an Angelino who has called LA home her entire life. She has a master's in landscape architecture, which allows her to pursue her passion for plants and environmental stewardship. She is an advocate for California native plants and utilizes them in her designs at every opportunity. I'd also like to mention those attending the virtual program today will have an opportunity to win a free book. So let's start the tour now.
Hi, welcome to this virtual garden tour. My name is Flor Mota and I'm a landscape architectural designer based out of East Los Angeles. And this garden is in Boyle Heights, and I designed and installed it 3 years ago for a good friend of mine that is actually a librarian that services this community. And if you don't know where Boyle Heights is, it's a neighborhood about 3 to 5 miles east of downtown LA. Also a prominent feature of Boyle Heights is the 5 freeway interchange, which is this way, and it cuts across Boyle Heights kind of in the middle. Another contextual feature of this garden is that it is in fact across the street from a very large park called Hollenbeck Park, which has been here since the turn of the century. And one of the things that we wanted to consider for this garden is the architectural style of the house, which is Spanish Revival, as you can see. And we wanted a plant palette that really complemented that. So there were really, as a designer, one of two approaches. A common garden design style for this type of house is either a tropical garden or a Mediterranean garden. And we wanted to see what fit best with the garden goals of the owner. And the owner had 5 garden goals. She wanted privacy. She wanted the garden to be drought tolerant. She wanted the garden to be a meditative space for her. She wanted the garden to also be an entertainment space for her friends and family. And she also wanted the garden to provide habitat and nourishment to local pollinators, such as birds and bees. And when we compared those goals to those 2 types of garden styles, we kind of ruled out a tropical plant palette because it's A, water intensive, and B, it provides little to no nourishment to local bees, birds, and butterflies. And so that's why we decided on a Mediterranean plant palette, and which is also why I decided to incorporate a lot of California native plants, which support monarch butterflies and also native bees. And also, most gardens in the LA region tend to be ornamental, and we really wanted this to kind of be an oasis, something different that stood apart. So let's start talking about the privacy elements of this garden. We wanted to really create a sense of enclosure for this garden because, as you can hear in the background, this is a very busy thoroughfare for pedestrians and for cars. And also an important consideration was that the main garden area has to be in the front because the backyard is entirely dedicated for parking for the residents that live here. Anybody that lives in LA knows that parking is scarce, so it was very important to preserve that parking area in the back. So that means that we had to achieve all of the 5 garden goals mainly in this area right here. So I wanted to pick a plant that really was drought tolerant and that provided thick, dense coverage. So eventually the branches will grow into one another and to the point where they will be matted and it'll be one continuous hedge. And when we planted these, they were about a foot high. And as you can tell, they've grown 5-fold. And another reason why we picked this plant is if you can see that it has tiny foliage. One of the tricks that garden designers use is they put smaller leaf plants in the background so that it makes the space look bigger. So if this was a hedging plant with larger leaves, it would lose that effect. And because this isn't a super large area, we really wanted to maximize the space as much as possible. And another way that we also create a sense of privacy here is by subdividing the garden into little rooms. The garden is already kind of partitioned into 3 kind of garden areas. The pathway cuts 2 of the garden areas in half, so you already have 2 rooms there. And we also have a side yard behind me, which is also another garden room in and of itself. And it was important for us to kind of create a sense of enclosure within a larger sense of enclosure by adding larger plants on the periphery. And so that eventually these can be furnished and the residents here can hang out and kind of feel like they have a little intimate space where they can unwind after a long day. So one of the other garden goals that the owner had was to create a sense of tranquility in the garden, a meditative space, something that the owner can enjoy after work or on the weekend or have coffee in the morning. And so we really wanted the garden to feel kind of lush because one of the things that studies have shown actually is that if you're surrounded by the color green, you automatically have a sense of tranquility. And we're gonna show you the garden so that you get a sense of how lush it looks. Also the various forms and shapes of the plants that kind of contribute to the sense of peace and meditation. So if you look behind me, you kind of get a sense for how lush everything is. And it's kind of hard to believe that this was installed 3 years ago. You'd think that this has been here forever, but it just goes to show what a good watering schedule does, and also the owner's personal touch in terms of maintenance. And so that's one of the things that I really wanted to talk about was how even maintenance itself or even watering the garden is a meditative exercise all in its own. These plants were babies. They were 1-gallon plants about this high, and with the owner's care and her personal touch, she's been able to create this beautiful, lush garden, which brings her a great sense of joy and peace. And also just seeing how the garden itself has evolved and seeing how it supports a lot of little critters can also be its own sense of meditation. And eventually, you know, when this olive tree next to me gets a little taller, she'll be able to furnish it, you know, underneath and be able to relax here as well. Also, once the shrubs, the hedges kind of grow in, she'll really have a sense of enclosure and privacy so that she can even more fully enjoy this garden. And I also wanted to talk about a little bit some of the plants, which I actually want to lead into how a California native plant garden is low water use, but it's also very fragrant, and such as this plant right here. This is salvia. It's a white sage. And one of the survival strategies that a lot of California native plants have is that the leaves are lighter in color and thicker, and that's because they retain a lot of the water in the foliage, and the leaves itself, by virtue of them being light, actually reflect some of the sunlight, and it helps them preserve water and it helps them survive during super dry areas, which is one reason why we included a few of them here. We really wanted to meet the low water goals of this garden. Even the olive tree here next to me, this is used to a Mediterranean region, so it doesn't require too much water. All of the plants here that you see require water maybe once or twice a week during this time. Maybe when it's first getting established, it requires more water because these plants are used to growing in a nursery where they're getting watered almost daily. And when you move them to a new setting, they sometimes even go into a little bit of a shock until they adjust. And then once, maybe about a year later, they'll start to kind of adapt to their new setting, and you can water them less and less frequently. Now, this garden in particular has no irrigation, so this is all hand watered. And part of the reason why that decision was made was due to budget constraints, but even though it was a constraint, I think at the end it ended up becoming an opportunity for her to really connect to the garden and really get a sense of how it performs and how it's thriving. And if something is not performing the way she wants it to, she can kind of adjust the watering schedule. And that's something that I think is important for all of us to do, is to find little ways to connect back to Mother Nature. I think we're so used to being in front of a computer or in front of the TV, and so much so that we've become disconnected. And this is one way where you can kind of reconnect. It's in human nature to try to nurture things that are beyond ourselves. And so that, you know, even an exercise like watering is its own sense of meditation and something that can really bring us a lot of joy and peace. And next, I want to talk about how this garden also provides opportunities for entertainment. As lush as it looks, believe it or not, we have created little areas that can accommodate a larger group of people. Welcome to the entertainment space of this garden. This is probably the most intimate, enclosed space of the entire garden, and that's because we are flanked on one side by the actual residence, and behind me there's a block wall. And we really wanted to not plant so heavily. So this is pretty much all open. And funny enough, these plants that you see me on the foreground are actually volunteered. We did not plant them, but they are like a wild onion, and I believe they're a native, and for some reason they just kind of started showing up, and they've been reseeding, so they're kind of popping up everywhere. And the owner decided to keep them because she thinks they're cute, and they don't really bother. So, you know, once this area is used for entertaining larger people, we might start, you know, getting rid of some of these, but for now they're fine. Another reason why I wanted to show you this space is to show you how we softened it up a little bit by planting a vine against a block wall. Before this, it was just an exposed block wall that had some discoloration, and we planted Boston ivy, which is not a California native, but it is a really beautiful plant that can attach itself to the wall and can just keep spreading. They have about a 20-foot spread, and it's easy to kind of green up a wall this way. It's an easy strategy. They're not that water intensive. And what I really love about this vine especially is that in the fall, they start turning a reddish color, and in the winter, they some of the leaves fall off, but come spring, they just spring right back up. And we really, really love this. And at night, there are string lights right above us, and they kind of help create a really beautiful and intimate ambiance. And that really, really makes this space feel really special. So next, I really want to talk about probably one of the most important priorities that the owner had, which was to provide habitat and nourishment to local pollinators such as bees, butterflies, and birds. So I want to point out to you one of the prettiest milkweeds here. So this plant that I'm standing right behind is a milkweed. And milkweeds, what's important about them is that monarch butterfly, when they're in the caterpillar stage, they can really only eat one kind of plant, and that's milkweed. And we planted a lot of different types of milkweed in this garden, like about 3 native, California native milkweeds. And this is not native. This is actually a Mexican milkweed, but for some reason, these have been performing better in this garden than the native ones. The native ones are starting to make a comeback, but you know what? This is doing just fine here, and the monarch butterfly caterpillars love it. As you can see, it's already kind of been munched on a lot. This past spring, this plant and others like it supported many transformations. There were lots of monarch chrysalis throughout this area especially. And what's beautiful about this Mexican milkweed is the color. It's a beautiful yellow. The native milkweed tend to be a little softer. They tend to be white and yellow. These are definitely more showy. And just as well, they provide the kind of habitat that monarch butterflies really need. If you don't know, monarch butterfly populations have been declining in the past 20 years, almost by 90%. Their habitat has been disappearing from here and also from Mexico, which is where they make their trek back and forth. And so it was really important for the owner to be able to provide whatever support she can to the monarch populations that migrate back over here. And so next I want to show you some other flowering plants that provide interest throughout the year that attract bees, particularly native bees. So I'm going to walk you back to the front. So this plant, this is called Verbena delamina, and it's actually a California native plant. It's from the Channel Islands. And the way you see it here, this is about as tall as it gets, which is about 3 feet tall and wide. And this pretty much looks good all year round, and it's flowers all year round, and the bees really go crazy for it. For this plant in the garden, I recommend like a harder prune in the fall so that when the spring comes, you get a lot of newish growth. so that it kind of maintains like a roundish, neater shape. But this is a favorite of mine because of the color and because the bees just go crazy for it. And the next plant I want to show you, which is probably one of the favorite California native plants that people just go crazy over, and that's the fried egg flower plant, or the Matilaha poppy. So this is the Matilaha poppy. As you can see, it's budding and it is about to bloom. And this is a really, really good, beautiful plant that gets pretty tall. It gets about 8 feet tall and wide. And it produces flowers about as big as my hand, with really delicate white petals and like a yellow center that looks like an egg yolk, which is why it's called the fried egg flower plant. Now this plant, unfortunately, you do really have to prune it back every year so that it comes back. But this was pruned last fall, and look how tall it is. People really, really love it. The petals last about a week each at most. Which is a downside, but the good thing is that it's constant. It produces a lot of flowers each year. And one cool thing about this plant is that the seeds are actually fire adapted. This plant has adapted to the fire ecology of this state, so you can't really just take seeds from this and put them in the ground and expect for a plant to grow. It really needs to go through a fire process in order for it to basically grow and bloom, which is a finicky thing about this plant, but and why it's so sought after, because it's kind of, it goes through a really tough process to basically be beautiful, and it really does speak to how unique our California ecology is. Thank you so much for joining this garden tour. It's been a pleasure for me to go through the design process and to go through some of the wonderful features of some of these plants. I can't wait to answer your questions during our Q&A, and thanks again for attending.
Hi, Flor. Hi.
How are you?
Thank you so much for that tour.
Yes, no, it was a pleasure. Anytime I get a chance to nerd out on plants, I'm there for it. So, I'm looking back at it, I kind of wish I talked about more things, like maybe, you have so many other native plants that are super distinct and beautiful, but we can talk about some of the things right now.
Yeah, we can talk about that right now. So before we get to everyone's questions, I wanted to touch on a few things. Like Flor said initially, my main focus of the garden was a meditative space, and I wanted something that was aesthetically pleasing and meditative at the same time with drought tolerant plants. So currently I have over 70 houseplants, and I wanted to incorporate those calming effects that I feel inside, outside. And I also wanted butterflies in my garden. Flor and I took a trip to San Miguel Allende in Guanajuato, Mexico, and we went to one of the gardens and it was flooded with monarchs. So I told her, that's what I want. I want that in my garden. And so Flor designed this beautiful garden for me. I have nurtured it. I have maintained it for almost 3 years. And it's been such a beautiful experience. And this year, with all the milkweed that I do have, I got a lot of monarch caterpillars. So I was, with the quarantine, I was stuck at home, and I was able to experience the life stages of the monarch. And I was able to capture a monarch laying an egg. I was able to see eggs up close. I was able to see the caterpillars grow and pupate and turn into the chrysalis, which is the cocoon. I was able to see them hatch. And also I was able to hold them. So once the monarchs hatch, it takes about a a few hours for their wings to dry. So they're usually just hanging out on a plant or wherever they hatch. So I would just stick my finger out and they would crawl on my finger. And it was such a beautiful experience. So I also want to point out that now more than ever, I want to provide a habitat for all pollinators, especially for the monarch. I'm not sure if everyone knows, but the monarchs that we do see in our neighborhoods are part of the Western California population. And that population has fallen 99% since the 80s. That's 99%. So in the 80s, we had millions of monarchs and it was great. And they're counted every year. So they were counted last year in November, and volunteers only counted 2,000. So a major factor in that drop has been the decline in milkweed, which is caused by farming and pesticides. So the Fish and Wildlife Services scientists have estimated that there is a 96 to 100% chance of the Western monarch population that will collapse in 50 years if we don't do anything about it. So what can we do about it? Well, we can plant native milkweed, but also in California, we don't have the legal authority to protect insects under the California Endangered Species Act. So like I said, what we can do is plant native milkweed, and we can find native milkweed. Where can we find native milkweed?
Yeah, so actually it's funny, like just 2 weeks ago, I went to the store called Plant Material in Eagle Rock, and they had a lot of milkweed, but there's that store if that's close to you. There's also Artemisia Nursery, which is close to me in City Terrace, Alhambra border, right by Cal State LA. They have a great selection of plants, other native plants as well. There's Hahamanga in Pasadena, like right by JPL and the foothills of the mountains. They're also super huge advocates for California native plants, and they have really a beautiful garden, and they constantly are creating little seedlings and experimenting with different cultivars, and I really, really do love that space. Also just because of their advocacy. So super big fan. Everybody should go. And I think those are like the 3 around here that I can really think of. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, what's affecting, the milkweed? It's farming and pesticides. So I know you know more about pesticides. So let's talk about pesticides.
Yeah. So for instance, for your garden, we never, right from the beginning, I told you cannot use Roundup. I know weeds are super pain in the butt, but you just have to, unfortunately, get rid of them by doing the hard work of weeding and getting good tools and just really getting down there and doing it. And eventually they'll just less and less will come back every year. But it's not super hard. Like how many times, how many times do you weed? Maybe like once a month or something. It's not crazy, like especially like in the spring or summer. Yeah. So it's totally manageable.
Yeah.
And another thing is just managing pests like scale by simply just washing a plant down with just water, maybe incorporate soap. It honestly doesn't take that much, even just cutting diseased plants and then just making sure that you clean your shears, you sanitize them with like diluted bleach or alcohol or hydrogen peroxide. I mean, these are factors that these are also ingredients that most people have in their homes. You don't really have to get the heavy duty chemicals. I think for your garden, take more of an integrated pest management. Such as even the yarrow that's in your garden as ground cover, that attracts a lot of ladybugs. And ladybugs are beneficial insects in any garden because they will eat some of the pests, right? So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, they eat because the milkweed gets a lot of aphids. So, the yarrow is the ground coverage, and they have the milkweed, and I see the ladybugs eating the aphids. I also see, what are those beetles called that are on the aphids that eat,
The
or that are on the
Asclepia beetles.
milkweed? Yeah.
Yeah, they're Asclepia beetles. Yeah, those are also beneficial. You know, they're called Asclepia, and that's the botanical name of the California milkweed. So, yeah, I mean, they're really easy steps. It's just people have to, I mean, honestly, just research it, but it's not that hard. And also, you know, Roundup is commonly used by the big agricultural companies for it's their management, their pest management strategy for a lot of our food crops, which is why, you know, a lot of the honeybees have, I mean, that's one of the theories and one of the factors that many people really believe is kind of affecting the bee populations. And so it's really, you know, it's really something that we can do in our own spaces, is really just preventing that, like talking to our gardeners and asking them to please not use any heavy duty chemicals in our gardens.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what
definitely.
I would recommend.
Yeah, also with the aphids it's usually, I found them on the milkweed and the mallow, the desert mallow that I have, which is also a California native, and it's a really pretty flower. So that's a desert mallow. And usually I just hose them off.
Yeah,
You've
so
told me just hose them off, and I hose them off, and everything's good.
also, it's not
Yeah.
the worst thing, you know, aphids, as long as it's not like killing your plant, it's honestly not the worst thing. Because if you do hose them off, you just have to like see if there are any monarch eggs that you're also washing off. You
Yes.
just kind of have to be a little attentive. But, you know, if you see aphids, it also isn't the end of the world. They're just a little unsightly.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to add about the bees?
Yeah,
I
I
already
really
gave
wanted
my
to.
whole spiel about the monarchs and how.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just really wanted to drive home the point of like, environmental stewardship. And, you know, you mentioned that part of the reason why the monarch butterfly populations have declined is because of development and for our farming practices. And what we can do as residences, you know, in LA, is create bridges that can get these animals, like you know, basically bridges between like residential areas and big open spaces of land where they can find the food that they're used to eating. A lot of native, like Griffith Park or Ascot Hills, you know, these
Yeah.
big expanses of land that are disappearing. It's up to us to really create that bridge to help them out, and it's not the hardest task. I mean, when I look at the tree cover in LA, it's not street trees, it's residential trees, it's our trees, it's what we decide to put in the ground. And you know, you can decide to put beneficial plants in the ground, native plants that can help pollinators and just help like the little critters like birds and even lizards who have,
Yeah,
you know, are all
definitely.
suffering. Yeah.
Yeah. And ever since, I mean, you designed my garden, I'm getting different types of birds that I've never seen or probably never paid attention to. But
Yeah.
I have lizards now. And like I said, I have ladybugs, and just seeing the monarchs. I sit in my garden and I'll get 3 to 4 monarchs just flying around. And it's so pleasant and it's so rewarding. And I just really recommend it for everyone. I've become a California Native advocate because of you. And it's so cool because I can also bring these programs to the library and inform everyone else. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I just started my garden too, and
that's
I
right.
just get so, yeah, I built it during the pandemic because I really wanted one, and I figured, you know what? How else am I gonna utilize all of this excess energy? And I planted my whole yard, and I'm just so happy seeing all of the bees and hummingbirds that frequent the space. I even added a little fountain and see birds that are just bathing, and it gives me so much gratification and joy. And I also want to invite everybody who's attending to visit my Instagram page. I don't have a website yet, but it's in progress, and just if you have any questions regarding where can you get native plants, or what is this plant, or any tips, or if you have any garden inquiries, you can feel free to message me. Yeah, I'm totally willing to be a resource for you.
Yeah,
So
Flor is a great resource.
yeah. So I think we're ready for questions. What do you think?
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add before we answer questions? Anything else?
No, I think I pretty much covered. Yeah.
All right. So let's start answering some questions. Okay. Rainy Wood says, I have a concrete wall in my backyard that gets super hot in the summer. Is this hedge plant heat tolerant? The hedge plant is the silver sheen.
Yeah, it is heat tolerant, and it's not a native plant, but the reason why we picked it is because it can really tolerate heavy shearing if you want to shear it as a hedge. And it's really also very beautiful. The foliage is small and silvery, and it's just a great background plant. So yes, it is heat tolerant.
Okay. Next question. Steve Roscoe, do the monarch caterpillar or chrysalis have to be protected from while on the milkweed?
Yes. So I think something that we didn't mention is that the reason why the caterpillar feeds on milkweed is because it's a survival strategy. Like milkweed is actually kind of like a noxious plant. Like it produces like a milk. If you break it, it produces a milky substance that's kind of toxic. And so caterpillars eat this because it makes them less appetizing to birds and bees, right? So it's a defense strategy.
Yeah.
So typically, I mean, yeah, they can defend themselves that way.
Yeah. All right. Next question. Gabriela Vasquez, can you talk a little bit about turning sidewalk, curbside dirt into soil for gardening?
Like the parkways?
Can you talk a little bit about turning sidewalk, curbside dirt into soil for gardening?
I would say that if you're talking about a parkway, you might need to amend the soil because it's right against the road, and some of the chemicals that from just the car exhaust may leach into the soil. So I would recommend leaching it. Also checking with your local municipality because they might have restrictions on what you can plant in your parkway, especially if you're on a corner. You don't want to affect visibility for cars. So just be mindful of that. But I mean, I would, if I had a parkway, I would just take that opportunity to plant something.
Yeah, I have a sidewalk, but I don't have a dirt patch. I guess the previous owner filled it with cement, and I'll get like crabgrass though that's growing through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Flor and I have talked about kind of breaking down that cement and planting some stuff, but I don't know. Yeah, because
it's a tough question.
Yeah, and we get a lot of pedestrians, and I feel like it's just going to get trampled. But I'm assuming the question was asked because, some of us don't really have space for native plants. So what can we do, Flor, if we don't have the space?
Well, you can actually just plant native plants in pots. You can have a little native garden that way. If you have like a stoop, a balcony, or just your entry, right? Like, flanking your front entrance, you can have little pots, different heights to create a sense of lushness and fullness. That's what I always recommend to people who have that question.
Let's see. Michael Kelly, what are some good native plants for sun-baked rocky hillside soils?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I always recommend on hillsides plants that are really good for erosion control also, like ceanothus, like a ground cover ceanothus, which is like a really beautiful plant with dark green leaves and with beautiful, beautiful lilac colored flowers. In fact, it's called the California lilac. And there are so many different types. I would recommend that. And also Baccharis, which is coyote bush, is super, super good and hardy. That one doesn't produce flowers, but it is really hardy, and it really kind of blankets a hillside with just green, beautiful like green color. There's also some manzanita varieties that are ground cover that are really good for soil retention and are super stunning and beautiful. They produce little like white pink flowers that are bell-shaped. And you can find them at any of the nurseries we mentioned. Also grasses, like the deer grass, the native deer grass is a structural, beautiful plant that it has like upright, I guess, foliage, and it's very structural. I would also recommend that. Maybe Artemisia. There's like a beautiful Artemisia called Canyon Gray that's super fragrant and beautiful, and it kind of looks like little tentacles. I'm such a big fan of that. Yeah. So yeah, I think those are good options.
You can go on and on, huh, Flor?
I could go on and on.
All right, we have another question. Jeep Girly, what book or books would you recommend that give names of drought-tolerant plants and flowers we could plant in our yards to make it appealing for bees and other pollinators? There are some websites too, right? Just want to mention that.
Yeah, there are websites. I think my go-to one is by Sarah Bornstein, and let me see. I don't remember the name of it, but is there a place I can post like the name if people have more questions like that I don't really know off the top of my head?
You can post it. You can post it on your Instagram page. You know?
Okay, I'll do that. If you visit my Instagram, I can story it showing some book options.
Yeah. That would be good. Also, do you have any websites on the top of your head that you can recommend? Isn't it water tolerant, or what is it? Waterwise, right?
Waterwise is a good one. Waterwise is a great resource. My go-to though is calscape.org, CALSCAPE, and that will actually show you the native regions of any given California native plant, which is helpful, and it gives you, if it's a coastal plant or inland, they have a lot of information.
And then Rainy Wood says, I noticed many baby ants on my milkweed, but I'm not seeing any aphids. Any tips on how to get rid of them without harmful pesticides? I hose them, but they come back.
I mean, I would maybe try soaping them or vinegar and water. Ants don't like vinegar, so I mean that's what I do in my kitchen. And it's fairly harmless, and if it's diluted, I would do that.
How much, like how many parts? How do you dilute the vinegar and water?
I'm not too sure, but I think if you Google it might be able. I'm not too sure at the top of my head. Sorry, maybe like a couple of tablespoons per quart or something. Yeah.
Well, looks like those are all our questions. Anyone else have another question? Looks like that concludes our tour. Well, Flor, again, I want to thank you so much for doing this tour and for landscaping my garden. You've been such a resource and such a huge help, and because of you now I'm obsessed with these plants, and it's been such a pleasure, and you've added so much. These plants and you, because you landscaped it, have added so much joy to my life. So thank you for that.
Oh my God, it's been my pleasure. I love visiting your house because it makes me feel like, oh my God, how are my babies doing?
Yeah, definitely. It's been really great.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending this. garden
Yeah.
tour. Again, please reach out to me if you have questions. Any more questions?
Yeah. All right, so that concludes our tour. And before I hand it over to Kevin, I would like to talk about the LA BioBlitz Challenge, which is a collaboration with the Los Angeles Public Library Neighborhood Science Initiative, which I am part of, and the LA Sanitation Diversity Program, which gives us an opportunity to become neighborhood scientists. So we become neighborhood scientists by photographing and helping map animals, insects, and plants. Wherever you see them in your neighborhood, your hikes, pretty much anywhere in LA, you see a plant, you take a picture of it. So the goal is to raise awareness about biodiversity in LA. And from now until August 7th, you can download the iNaturalist app and check out lapl.org/bioblitz for more details. So the biodiversity team in the LA Sanitation and Environment Department will use this information and data to map out wildlife distribution. Also, I'd like to mention a partnership between the Natural History Museum and the R.L. Stevenson branch located here in Boyle Heights for a bird program. So representatives from the Natural History Museum will talk birds, why they're so interesting, aka only living beings with feathers who are descendants from dinosaurs. And also we'll talk about the types of birds that you see in Boyle Heights. And we'll end it with a fun craft. So this program will be held at the R.L. Stevenson branch here in Boyle Heights. And you can check out their Instagram page at R.L. Stevenson Library for more information. Thank you again so much for joining our program. And now I'd like to hand it over to Kevin.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for today's LA Made program. Remember to check out the library's online calendar at lapl.org/events. Please join the Summer Reading Challenge, which is still going on. You can collect points for reading and completing fun, learning-based activities. Go to lapl.org/summer for more information and to register. And don't forget, you don't want to miss our next LA Made program on Thursday, July 8th at 4 p.m. with Theater Dubuque. Sorry about that. Erin Henney, Artistic Director of Theater Dubuque and storytelling expert, will take you on a journey through your own visions for the future of our planet. In this unique workshop, you will develop and create narratives that express what hopes and lessons you wish to pass on to the generations to come. The session will also help you to process how to best advocate for a healthier world. It will be streaming live on our YouTube and Facebook channels. We really appreciate all your support. See you next time. Goodbye.